Okay, we're live. Welcome, everybody, in the Elephant Academy. We are here with Professor Ada,
Hello.
who now you're like a veteran. You've been here, I think, 3 times, maybe.
Because it's my third time.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming back.
Always.
Most people have such an awful experience with me once. It's over.
I doubt that.
So if everyone can take a good posture, we start these meetings with a Buddhist bow of respect and remembering our mission in life. Assuming everyone can hear me, when we bow, just type parentheses, bow parentheses, after you actually do a real bow. So take your best posture of the day, find your breath, relax your posture so it's not uptight or rigid, and with a sense of humor and heart and mission to be a benefit, give it away. All right, well, we are here to solve once and for all the little thing called voice in writing. I've read some of Ada's writings from your books, your articles, and you make it look easy, so I assume it's voice in writing must be easy because Ada makes it look so easy. You're like the Joe DiMaggio of writing.
Thank you. I'm going to put that on my business cards now.
Yeah. I say Joe DiMaggio because my dad would always say he made fielding and hitting and everything look easy, but it was because he practiced more than anybody. So is that an appropriate analogy? I guess maybe we could start with that. Like, were you born with a pen and a great voice, or did you kind of find your voice over time?
It took a long time. I think I've been a reporter for 20 years. Pretty much every different kind of writing. I was a theater critic for a while. I did arts reporting. I did crime reporting. I tried to write fiction. I've done everything. I've got a really bad novel in a drawer if you ever want to read it. And I think it's just finally
half a chapter of it.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind if I can bear to.
If it's really bad, I trust you. So
yeah. I think it's really bad, but I did a lot, and I did a lot of bad writing for a really long time, decades, maybe a decade, and then I started to figure out what was working, and a lot of that came from feedback from editors, where I started to see the things that immediately were accepted if I sent them in, or the things that got a huge response from readers. And I really learned from that. I learned from editors and from readers.
So that's one. So in the Elephant Academy, we do like a month of writing, a month of journalism ethics, a month of editing. I feel like editing is often overlooked. And whenever you say, how do you become a good writer? Everyone always likes to say, read, read, read. I always say, get edited, edit other people, edit, edit. So what specifically did you learn from your editors, and were some of those lessons hard to hear?
Some of them are, painful. I had one editor, and he edited me a lot, and he's wonderful, really nice guy. But I would get those edits, I would cry like every time, because it was so devastating, because you'd think you did a really good job, and then it would be like just a slash through a whole page, or it would be, what does this mean? Or, who cares about this person, or whatever it was. And he was always right. His bedside manner maybe lacked a little something, but it was really helpful, made me a better writer.
So in this, I feel like our current Instagram era of, kind of complaint about everything, there's a positive side to it, which is activism and all these things, exposing injustice. But the negative side is, at least in my experience as a boss with the occasional millennial employee, like giving people harsh feedback is it's almost like not wanted anymore. People want everything. They want they want free soda and free Starbucks and free yoga and games in the office, but they don't want hard feedback, which is part of growth as a writer. So what were some of the specific lessons or the bad habits you had that were illuminated?
I think one of the major ones was this is really tiny, but it took me a while to break the habit, was using weak verbs. Like they always say a weak verb is is or something, right? So instead of saying, he is smart, really finding a way to show that in a much more interesting way. You know, when he walks in the room, he blah, blah, blah. He always says something that blah, blah, blah. Like to actually use information that you have rather than just solving it for everybody and saying it. That's the kind of classic show, show, don't tell, but I think it's like showing and telling at the same time.
Yeah, that's kind of brilliant. That's super helpful. I'm just like stealing the good lessons from that guy too. Because if you can show that he's smart by demonstrating his behavior or his observation or his interaction, if he's a character that you're writing about, then you don't have to just state it, which is like a weird kind of cliche. And, I always say with writers, like if you use cliche, studies have shown that your brain doesn't even react to cliche.
Right. It's just like the background noise.
Yeah.
And one way to do that, a simple way that I found when I'm trying to explain to like students, is try to get rid of all your adjectives and adverbs. Like write something, try to cut out all your adjectives and adverbs.
Yeah.
And try to see if you can do without some of those weak verbs like to be.
Yeah.
And almost every time it'll be transformative.
That's challenging advice even for, I grew up in the like Beat Generation Kerouac school where they took all the adverbs in a bucket and emptied them out onto everything.
They're just like, more adverbs, more adjectives.
Yeah. Lists of adverbs. But yeah, stripping it down. Like in architecture, I don't think everything has to be simple and white walls and beautiful kind of Instagram hipster decor. Right. I love Victorian decor, which can be cluttered and rich and full and interesting, but you have to first do the spring cleaning as a writer.
You can put it back in after you take them out, but just see what happens. See which ones you really need and which ones you don't.
I love that. So let's, I wanted to frame this as sort of your living out my idea in the 90s of like the ideal writer's career.
Doesn't but thank you.
I love your reaction because that's exactly what I mean by, in the full sense of that title, if this was the title for this conversation, ideal writer's career is a real thing that isn't ideal. And it takes a lot of hustle, even with all your success. And so I want to talk about like what's behind, if you look at your bio on your website, it's like, New York Times and Oprah and viral this and books and you're in New York and you've got like a cool husband who, everything seems awesome.
Great.
And it's not that it isn't awesome and wonderful and real, but give us an idea for those of us who are listening who want to go into writing, who are crazy enough to want to go into writing as a career.
Sure.
How did your career kind of, what steps would you advise others to look at taking?
Well, I mean, I think the reason it looks good is because I don't put my failures down in my bio, right? I don't list, if I get one fellowship or one award, I don't list the 20,000 others that I did not get, even though I thought I was really totally going to get them. Yeah. So that's why it looks good, right? And I think to your Joe DiMaggio analogy, I try a lot of things. I mean, I fail all the time. I have my best friend, Tara. She's a reporter in Washington, D.C. And she always says, every time I complain to her, she says, well, if you're not failing, you're not doing your job. You have to get rejected every day. She gets hung up on by sources constantly. She said, that's our job. That's what we're supposed to do. So I take that very seriously. And I think, I try a lot of stuff and enough of it sticks that I've been able to cobble together a career. And I do a lot of different things even now. So I write my own books and I write articles for magazines and I ghostwrite for other people, for celebrities. And I teach sometimes. And, I'm able to make a life as a writer, which I find miraculous. I feel really lucky, but it takes kind of nonstop hustle and work and failure, getting rejected.
So you kind of answered my question by saying, I feel lucky. Like at the end of the day, how does it feel? Like after all the failure and the occasional big successes and the many modest successes, is it a life that you would recommend to others?
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm fortunate that I can't do anything else. I even tried recently.
Right.
I thought like, oh, this writing stuff, I hadn't had enough income for a few months. I have a, kid and I live in New York City, and it's hard. So I thought, oh, I'm just going to go back to what I used to do and be an editor, work full time, for some corporation. And I was like, I'm ready to sell out. And nobody would have me. I mean, I like pitched myself to like 20 places. I got like 2 interviews. It was like, they weren't interested. And so thank God I got another book deal, but I feel lucky. I mean, it's really wonderful to make my own schedule. There's just like logistical glories about being freelance. And just to have a different day every day. I mean, I've never had the same day twice, ever.
Right. Yeah. Well, I've talked to all the Elephant editors, and they got together and said they're happy to fire me at any time. If you want a job at Elephant.
Thank you. I might take you up on that. We'll see how this book goes.
Waylon's out. He had some good advice, but no bedside manner. So, let's talk about that book deal. So you have a brand new book deal. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And
it's like an hour old. Yeah.
What's that?
It's like I just signed it. Yeah. It's like today. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So are you like a little tipsy right now?
I should be, right? Where's the champagne? It's supposed to balloons are supposed to fall from the ceiling.
Yeah. So congrats. Everyone should, no pressure, but we should work. So that's exciting. So what's the book about? What's the title? How did it happen?
So I was having this really rough summer where I was trying to get a job and no one would have me. And my book, Wedding to a Soul I'll Never Give, had come out. But I was in this sort of postpartum period of that. And all this ghostwriting work I was supposed to be doing had fallen through. Oh, look, all the congratulations. So sweet. So I was just really desperate. And then I got this call from this editor at Oprah.com. And she said, we're looking for a writer to do a story about Generation X women in midlife. And we just read something you wrote. We think you might be a good fit. Would you be interested? And what she was really saying was, we need a story about midlife crisis. And we think you're having one based on your articles. So you write this long piece about it. And I didn't have anything else going on. And so I said yes. And it was fascinating. I wound up doing kind of a deep dive in Generation X and what Generation X women in particular are dealing with. And it was fascinating. There was so much research backing up this editor's idea.
So that right there, how you said it, is interesting. They read some of your articles. You had some successes with New York Times, Modern Love, or wherever, I'm guessing. And then they read that, and then you got further success out of those. So that's a little bit how you cobble together a career, right?
That's right. You usually parlay one thing into, and that's one thing I always tell people who are starting out. You find wherever you can get published, and a local paper is great. An online magazine is great. Wherever they will have you, get published there and do good work. And then you have clips and you parlay that. You kind of just trade it up the ladder, like a barter system or whatever it is, where you take a paper clip, and you get a car or whatever that fantasy is. So you can take it all the way.
So we're not here to talk about me, but I started Elephant because I actually was getting back into journalism, which I had trained in. Right. After I had done some other stuff. And I heard about this startup yoga magazine, and I just offered to write an article for free because I was just starting out again to get some clips. I was trying to get clips going. And then the guy asked me to be his partner, basically, and then he quit. And suddenly I owned a yoga magazine, and and then it became Elephant, basically. So watch out when you get started. Would you mind reading just my favorite thing that I'm so in love with about you, other than your wonderful personality and self-deprecation and all that, is your voice as a writer. So would you mind reading? I would love to hear a little bit of your writing in your voice from that article. And tell us about that article. It's super viral, I guess, right?
So it took me about 2 months to write it. I did a lot of reporting. I talked to probably 30 some odd women and a dozen experts. And it ran at like 6,000 words, which is very long for online. But it went viral right away. Like within 2 days it had 300,000 Facebook shares, like not even, like it had millions of page views, but it had just all the sharing I thought was really interesting. And it had like Gen X women who said that their entire Facebook wall was like all people sharing this story. And they're like, I get it. I'm having a midlife crisis. Did I just read the opening? I called it up.
Whatever you like. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Sometimes I think I'm falling apart. Then I talk to my friends. One spent a whole winter getting a babysitter for her toddler daughter in the middle of the day and then used the time to go to the movies and cry. I run into another and ask how it's going with her kid's father, whom last I heard she was fighting with. She fixes me with a blank stare. I'd leave, she says, if I had more money. A woman I used to work with tells me that she lets people believe her impressive LinkedIn profile is the truth, but that secretly she is underemployed and feels like a failure. A friend of a friend tells me she's having a rough time as a single mother since her husband left her. And then I tell the story about how she smashed her kid's iPad when he wouldn't help her pack for their trip. For a while, I thought it was just type A strivers, but then I started hearing the same sort of thing, even from my low-key friends. When I reached out to strangers for the story, I heard the same toxic brew of fear, anxiety, and anger, not to mention sweatiness and insomnia. So I end this first part and I say that I called my best friend, who I already mentioned. She's a reporter a few years older than me who grew up in the Midwest. She has 3 children, lives on a quiet, leafy street in Washington, D.C. with her boyfriend. They recently adopted a dog. Hey, I said, happy to have caught her on a break from her job. Do you know anyone having a midlife crisis I could talk to? The phone was silent for a second. Finally, she said, I'm trying to think of any woman I know who's not.
Wow. That's a great, so, I guess there's so much to how that story unfurled, but how did you decide to begin the story in that way? Because there's so many different entry points, right?
Yeah. Well, I like that line from her so much because I had been having that experience. Everybody I was calling was sort of like, or they would say, a lot of times they would say something like, oh, I'm not having a midlife crisis. I'm like, well, I'm really worried about money and I don't sleep anymore. And I'm thinking about getting divorced. And they would list 20 different problems they were having. They'd be like, it's not a crisis. I'm like, sounds like a crisis.
Yeah.
So I knew I wanted to end with that line from Tara just because I thought it was really good. And then I knew I wanted to start with something personal, just to say that this is me too. I'm in my 40s and I'm totally Generation X by every metric. And so those are the things I knew. And I know I want to just set up this idea that there are a lot of women out there going through this.
And what I love, it connects with what we were talking about, is there's, in terms of strong verbs, there's every single person you list, we visualize them. It feels cinematic, almost like a Sex and the City 4 opening, and you're going through different characters, and now you're about to see them all have their life crises. Yeah.
Good. It's an example of that because it would be very easy to just say I saw my one friend, she's sad. I saw my other friend, she's very sad too, and to describe their feeling. But I think to get to the actual visceral feeling of what they're going through, you really have to describe a moment. So I think that I worked on really hard was to go through all those transcripts, so hundreds of pages, and find those moments where you see it. If you see a woman at crying at the movie theater alone and paying for a babysitter so she can do it, that's dark, right? That's a dark moment that you get how hard it is on her that period of time.
So 2 things. One is one thing I love about you and your voice is you don't skip over the dark stuff, but you somehow make it warm and human. Good. You normalize the dark stuff. In the sort of yoga world that Elephant can be in sometimes, there's a sort of school of positivity, which is sort of more the Stepford wife, kind of everything is fine, everything's cheerful, and beneath that is a whole world of dark terror.
Right.
But you actually talk about the dark terror, and from a Buddhist point of view, that's where you can find genuine empathy and humor, and your own voice. And then from a writing point of view, I love that you reference hundreds of pages of transcripts. That voice isn't just some beautiful voice that you discovered under a rock one day. There's a lot of work that you're doing to get to what you just read. Yeah.
No, and I think that I research everything, even if it's a personal essay. I try to do a lot of reading and talking to people and just trying to figure out something original to say something, you know, like you were talking about cliche earlier. I think just figuring out what's not cliched about what you're talking about is really hard. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of like sitting down, writing about it, thinking about it. But also I think it helps to read other people on it and to talk to people, you know, who are smart and, you know, really just like work it.
Yeah, you and I met because you invited me to join you at a Boulder bookstore reading with your book and my book. And my book was all about love. And that was an awful challenge to write about because it's so, it tends toward cliche or trends toward cliche, you know, again and again and again. And you have to pull it back every time and nail it down kind of.
Right. And I think one way you do that so well is that it's so much about your own quest and your own personality and, you know, your kind of innermost hopes and dreams. And I think when you make things really personal in that way, they wind up being universal. Yeah.
And you're being very generous. You're also in a kind ways admitting that I did zero research. I just went off my
well, there's lots of ways to get to the same place.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think, you know, we just went over journalism ethics. I do think that's a profound lesson for all of us, including myself, that there's nothing stopping any of us from doing a lot of actual research about other human beings and not just always doing the sort of my experience, which is a beautiful place to get after you've done that work.
Yeah. Well, I think when you write about other people, if you can talk to them or, you know, if you're in a position where you can talk to them about what you wrote about them before it's published, you can often wind up having a really interesting experience that benefits the writing and benefits you as a person. And definitely in my last book, I talk about a lot of old boyfriends. My husband joked like, you know, what is this book? This is the excuse to talk to ex-boyfriends, like memoir. Like, yeah, maybe. And I think that it provides, like writing about something I think can provide closure for you in this way, like writing memoir, writing personal essay, because you're putting a story around something that's just a memory and kind of nebulous feelings, right? You're saying what the beginning is, what the middle is, what the end is. And it takes away some of its power sometimes over you. Like maybe you won't cringe quite as much when you remember it next time because you've kind of figured out what it means to you and figured out what the story is there.
Yeah, amen. I talk a lot about catharsis. Like, you know, you've kind of found your voice when you're writing about unresolved sort of chaos or difficult situations. And it feels super good and it comes out kind of weirdly clearly. And it's actually helpful for other people to read. It's not self-obsessed.
Right. And I think especially if you put it into a form, like an essay, where it's not just a blog post that, you know, that's start to finish, 200 words of whatever. If you're actually going to take it and put a beginning and a scene and put a middle and put an end and really like format it into this structure, for me, that's the thing that actually winds up feeling the most liberating.
Well, I'd love to talk about, so you went from some people at Oprah.com read something you'd written or a couple things you'd written, then they assigned you this thing, you accepted, you write it, it's huge viral success. And then from there, how did it become now a book as of an hour ago?
Next year, I'm writing the book right now.
Or a book,
with that?
A book deal, I should say.
Yeah. So, so like a lot of editors are really, I think once you have millions of women, you know, book buying type women, like really gung ho about something, I think the editors notice. So there were a few editors who were really interested. So I had a lot of meetings and then, we went with one. And so it just got, it hasn't been announced yet. So that'll happen in a couple weeks probably. But yeah, I'm really happy I get to explore this more at length and talk to a lot more women and sort of tell stories in more detail than I was able to in that article.
But from a business or career point of view, how do you get from like a big success, which is hard enough to get to a book deal?
Yeah. So basically, if you are in a position to want to sell a book, having an agent is almost essential if you're doing something mainstream. And I'm going to put an asterisk on this and say that you managed to sell more books than most of my friends, you know, who have agents and have fancy book deals with big companies. So you should tell everybody too how you did that. Well done.
Yeah.
But the mainstream route, which is what I'm in, which, is no better or worse, but it's the like kind of official way. You have an agent. Your agent sends a proposal that you write around to editors. Those editors read the proposal. If they're interested, they tell your agent they're interested, and they set up a meeting. Then you go in for meetings with whoever's interested. You sit down with them and talk about their vision for the book and your vision for the book, and you see if you get along. It's like dating.
Right.
Those you ideally one or more will actually bid on the book, and then if more than one bids, then they fight over it, which is good for you.
Yeah.
And then you pick your editor.
And in terms of the dating moment, I mean, so that's part of the reason I published my own book is I was kind of insecure or protective about the book, and I met with a few publishers, and they very quickly were like, "Oh, we're going to work on the title. The cover should be like this." And I was like, "Nah, I didn't like it being."
If you're a control freak, you can't work in mainstream publishing very easily because you have very little control over a huge amount of things.
Right, because I kind of feel like knowing you and your personality even a little bit, like your book covers would be so quirky and funny and creative and charming. They'd be very New Yorker-y in my mind.
I like my book covers. It's funny, they do include you usually in the discussions about all those things. And I've heard horror stories from friends where they were like, please don't put a high heel on my book. And then they would put a high heel on the book. Like that does happen. But, my publisher was very nice. And they were like, we just want to go really simple with this wedding toast. We just want to like have the words and some like pretty color. And that's what they did for this last one. And the other one, I didn't really like at first, the St. Mark's is Dead cover, but they were like, trust us, it's good. And I did trust them. And now I really like it.
That cover was sweet. I like that cover.
I think it's cool. Yeah.
That showed some real like work. So I want to encourage at this point, anyone who's here who has specific, not cliche, specific questions.
I'll take a cliche question. I don't care.
Yeah. Eight is very nice, but specific questions about career or specific questions about writing, about anything that Ada can help you with. She is all ours for like half an hour, I think.
Yeah.
What else should we
You should tell about your strategy. So, because I think it's so incredible as a path that doesn't involve, because I think also if you're not in New York City to do meetings and find your agent and go to the parties where you'll meet the editor who will sign you the op-ed. And it's social, a lot of it is social. And so I feel like what's that?
I love the social stuff. I feel like I'm missing out.
You'd be great at it. Yeah, but it's hard. It's hard across. Yeah.
No, I'm not even saying it defensively. I love that idea. That would be, to me, more fun than writing or editing half the time. It just be the cocktail parties. But I think for me, I had a platform, so I had the option to do it this way.
Right.
I think if you don't have a platform, it's difficult. If you're looking to make a living at all, anyway. If you just want to write like your cherished, wonderful book, I think self-publishing is fantastic for anyone. But there's real power in working with editors and with, you work with editors you respect, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I've never been in the position where I had to like choose somebody who was offering less money and more kind of creative editing, but I would make that decision.
Yeah. For me, it was pretty easy in the sense that I had a big platform. I've sold a print magazine. I felt like I kind of had the experience to do it. The editing process, I basically hired a colleague of mine from Elephant to do that.
Yeah.
And I hired someone who was incredibly loving and patient, but also unafraid to criticize me and tear apart my writing, which is key.
That's good.
And also wasn't flaky at all, because the process of editing was so long and so hard. Writing it was vaguely, so I wrote it, I serialized it so that I could build up a big, 108,000 Facebook fans, which at the time meant something. Now it's like, you're not going to get anything out of 108,000 fans on Facebook, really. But at the time, I had a big community of people ready to read it. based on every chapter I put up on Elephant. And I got good feedback by serializing it along the way, which helped me.
Yeah.
And then selling it mainly through Instagram, newsletter, my whole platform. So I won't go too much into that because we have lots of questions.
I just thought there's like 20 great questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can drive yourself, or let's start with Janine here.
So how do you share your writing with someone?
Oh, I have to read it out loud, right? Do you want to read it out loud? Yeah.
Sure. How do you share your writing with someone you've interviewed? I've gotten pushback about quotes I've shared, and they now don't want me to write it. I'm new at interviewing people and was curious what the best practices are. So it's a really good question, and it's something, I don't know if this makes you feel better, but every writer I know deals with this at various times. I was just talking to a friend of mine who writes for the New York Times a lot, and she actually just saw her like a week ago, and she was complaining about exactly what you're talking about, where she had done this interview with this doctor who had said kind of off the cuff this incredibly funny thing, made like a joke, about, I think it was something about women in medicine. And she was a woman in medicine. And anyway, but it was very, very funny. And then my friend dutifully went back to her and said, here's what I'm writing. And just told her, this is the quote I'm planning to use. And she said, no, say it like this, and like took all the humor out of it. So then my friend pushed back and said, I really think the first version's better. It's much funnier. I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I really want to use this quote. And they had a conversation about it, and it ended, fortunately, with keeping the quote. It's a tap dance. It's hard. One best practice, you asked what best practices are, is not to send text in an email. I've found over and over again that if I give a source a control of the words, they will always change them. They will always see it and think, oh, this could be much better this way. And then they rewrite it. They're not a writer. They just, think, and they wind up adding a lot of unnecessary fluff. And it's a problem. I like to read things over the phone. And I like to contextualize, or by email, I like to sort of summarize. Say, I quote you saying something about how women in medicine, are in a bad position. And that's it. Is that not true? And try to just give them yes or no, a way only to give yes or no responses. Is this correct? I quote you saying something like this. So they know what's going to be in there. They're not surprised, but they don't have control of the actual words you're using. That's my advice.
And from a journalism point of view, it's somewhat unethical. I don't know if it's unethical. That's probably too strong of a word, but to allow people to kind of change. Once they know they're on the record and you kind of relax them and you get them talking, it becomes PR if they get to like edit and correct and make everything safe.
And you and you never send the full manuscript no matter what, right? If you write a whole article about someone, you don't send it to them before. It's acceptable to send little clips, little quotes. But even that, I prefer not to do. I'd rather do it on the phone.
You want to fact check the hell out of it, but you don't necessarily want to give them control of the words.
Yeah, that's why I think it's good just to summarize whenever you can.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that it's hard. And I think, like you said, taping them and transcribing really faithfully, that's going to be your best thing. Because the fact is, like, once they go on the record, they've given the interview, you've taped it, they know you're a journalist. It's good manners to check it with them and make sure they're okay with this and they know it's going to come out and all that. But it's, at that point, you're within your rights to publish it if they've given you these quotes on the record, and you have it verbatim. So keep that in mind, that you're in a position of more power than you think you are.
Yeah. And great. So probably tons of good questions. So Brianna, maybe?
Oh yeah, so how important or unimportant is a formal education in writing to pursue a career in the field? I majored in Sanskrit, so I don't know how much that tells you, but I've never taken a writing class.
Next question.
But I have a lot of friends who have, and I will say that they made a lot many fewer mistakes than I did as they were starting. I mean, I was a reporter before I knew what I was doing, and I feel like I don't even want to go back and read that stuff because I feel like I probably misquoted people. I didn't know how to fact check things. I didn't know what the ethics were. I didn't know so many things. And I could have saved myself so much trouble. And I have friends who just had a much easier time. And I think, got to where they wound up a lot faster than I did. I mean, like I said, 20 years I've been doing this. And I could have probably shortened that by a lot.
Yeah. I think working with great editors, if you didn't get the education, will help get you that education. So seek them out. Even if those great editors are your good friends and they just have a knack for it.
For sure.
I went to journalism school and I was like straight A kind of nerd, kind of full of myself, and I got torn apart. I always fondly remember a journalism professor who I couldn't get a single sentence by him for an entire month or two, like not one sentence. He went, he emptied full red pens out on my writing. It was a great experience.
Yeah.
So it is important, but if you don't get it, don't let that stop you. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I also started out writing for the Austin Chronicle in Texas, which was a free weekly from back. This was in the late 1990s, I guess. And there was so much writing. It was like 11 cents a word. And I wrote just as many words as they would let me write every week. And I'd go review a band, I'd go review a movie, I'd go, do anything they wanted, interview somebody. I remember they were like, who will go to the Bloomsday celebration for like 24 hours of reading Dubliners or whatever? And I'm like, sure, no problem. So, I think just being hungry is really helpful, and whether or not you have a degree.
Right. Ghostwriting. Security?
So could you tell us a bit about ghostwriting? Many people are attached to their writing and want credit. Is that an issue with you while ghostwriting? So it's very funny that you asked me that today, because there's a book that just came out today. I won't tell you what it is, but that I ghostwrote. And I mean, and I never want credit on books. I actually specifically ask for my name not to be anywhere on them, because I want it really clear this is theirs. And if it was all mine, I would do it differently. And so I just am like a vehicle, like a midwife or a, medium or something to help them realize their dreams. It is always a little funny though, to like see the book on the shelf or see people talking about it and then just be like, it just feels a little surreal occasionally, but no, I don't. I think of myself as a helper, or as like an editor basically in those cases.
Is it interesting? Like, do you find your voice completely changes when you're writing in someone else's voice?
It's their voice. Yeah, no, that's the point. It's like, that's why I said mediums. Like I've written for a very diverse group of people. I don't think one person I've, written for has been like, a white Generation X woman. I try to help people tell stories who wouldn't necessarily be able to tell their own story for various reasons. Either they're too busy, or, they're just not writers, or they don't really know which of their stories are interesting or whatever it is. So I tape them talking, I tape them and I transcribe, and then I structure it. So it's more like editing. It's like a crossword puzzle.
How many books have you ghostwritten?
12.
12, wow.
Yeah, in like the last 4 years.
So I know you don't want to say which titles, but are there, say, 12 random books that come to mind that you think we should check out randomly?
No, I shouldn't say. You can, like, I'm in the acknowledgments of some of them. So if you just go to the bestseller racks occasionally and just open to the acknowledgments page, sometimes you'll see my name.
Damn, bestseller rack.
I've had 5 bestsellers, I think.
Damn, you're like a hit machine. You're like Motown of the West Village.
Fair.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Okay.
Wendy?
How do you visualize your reader? Is it knowing that determines what you write? Oh, so like, I never really do. It's funny because I do actually know a lot of friends who have that. Like, I have a friend who's a memoirist, and she really has this. I don't know if you know, like the J.D. Salinger story of like the lady sitting by the radio. I can't remember which. Sit in Franny and Zoe. Does anybody know? Anyway, they have this idea, right, of the like listener to their radio show, and like in great detail. And I have friends who have that, like they just see her or him, and I never have. So some people do and some people don't. But yeah, I mean, I hear from people I hear from kind of like always a surprisingly diverse kind of group of people who relate to stuff I write for really different reasons.
I feel kind of like when I read your stories, I feel like we're just like maybe I'm one of your girlfriends or your buddies, whatever. Like, you know, that it's almost like a genderless feeling that I'm like a friend of yours and we're catching up.
Mm-hmm.
Like telling me about kissing that guy in that modern love story, and that we're friends is intimate, but at the same time, I don't know that much about your life. So like we're old friends who haven't been in touch for a while.
Right.
That's the feeling I get.
That's good. Yeah, I think personal essay writing and memoir writing, I think that's the goal of a lot of it, is to make readers feel like they know you at the end of it in some way, like, or feel a closeness. Because I do think that the gift of personal writing, of whatever kind, is that it makes people feel less alone. They feel like seen or understood in some way.
So this is a real opportunity to get some accessible, friendly, non-condescending wisdom from an amazing New York writer. So go nuts, guys, if you have questions.
I like your all caps. No pressure, more questions.
Yeah, I wanted to type no pressure. I just didn't have time. All right. What's that? Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I blog, you mentioned failure and how important it is to keep trying, and failure is part of that. There's that kind of wonderful cliche Nike commercial from, I think, the 90s with Michael Jordan talking about how he failed more than anybody else and that's why he's great. I wrote a blog using that about the importance of failure and any endeavor. Malcolm Gladwell, of course, wrote about 10,000 hours.
Right.
You know, like work at something again and again, and at some point, some fruition begins to occur. Like your craft you become good at that craft. So so CJ just put that blog in there about failing, and watch that video. If you haven't seen it, it is a commercial, a Nike commercial, but it's great.
So yeah, there you got your questions you wanted. So I've heard finding your voice repeatedly. Yeah. How do you know when you find your voice? Yeah. I mean, I think it's like a religious question. It's really, it's sort of, that's where the magic-y stuff is. It's like, how do you know when you fall in love, or something equally esoteric? Like, I think you only know when you know, and and your voice can change over time. And I don't think it's like bells go off and angels descend.
That's what I love about your voice again, and the voices of other writers I love, like Michael Pollan or Gladwell or whomever, is they're very ordinary. It's like the fruition is the voice feels incredibly natural. Like when I was just reading a couple paragraphs of one of your modern love essays to CJ here, who hadn't read you, and instantly you like are in the story, you're in the conversation, you want to read more. It's incredibly natural. It's not exactly like some magical fruition thing. It's Buddhists call it ordinary magic, actually. Oh. It's something really, it's like you can knock on wood with it. It's real.
And I think maybe it's close to you as a person. Like, I think, like you said, I'd have to like run through every writer I know who I like, but I think it's the case for everyone I can think of off the top of my head that it's like being with them somehow. It's very rare that I meet someone and I've read their writing and I'm like, that's impossible. That could never have come from you. Like, I think there's usually some connection. It's maybe, so in that sense, I think writing and working on your voice is really about kind of figuring out what you have to say in the world and how you want to say it.
Yeah, it's funny. And I do think there is some connection with the audience there in terms of also finding your audience, even if you don't exactly visualize your audience. But, I write a daily editor's letter, and my voice in the editor's letter is much closer to your voice in those. It's an essay voice, which is 1,000% different than my things I would like to do with you book voice, which was right. Poetic and kind of romantic or lyrical.
Yeah, I think poetic writing is maybe an exception where you don't meet a poet and then like they talk like that. So for essays. Somebody asked about says they've built a small but loyal following just by writing for Elephant. In your opinion, how important is it to have published articles and a substantial following before publishing a book? It really depends, right? It depends what kind of sales you're expecting. I think if you have a platform, it's much easier to sell books. So if you've published a lot and you feel like you have fans and you people will see your name on a book and they will buy it, that's helpful. But if you don't care and you just have a book's worth of stuff to say and sales aren't really a high priority, or then I think publish away anytime. Or especially if it's something that people are going to want to read about no matter who you are, and it doesn't matter, then yeah, you can have a bestseller about your, climb up Mount Kilimanjaro or whatever it is, even if they don't know you. Oh.
So Kenny, maybe?
Kenny, okay. How do you balance writing with the full-time job of being a mom? Well, it's actually been really good for me because I can drop my son off at school and pick him up. And that is really great. Like, I have to write in between those times. It's made me much more efficient. I think before I was a parent, I think I took time for granted. Like, what did I even do with those hours? I don't even know now, because every minute now is really efficient. And I think that's one advantage of becoming a parent. It goes well together, I think. The only hard part is that in order to do things like structure, or, really strong, thoughtful writing, like, I think you need to kind of get in your own head enough to do that. And sometimes it takes me a day or so. So if I have to do that, sometimes I'll go away for a couple days, like give myself a residency. Right. And that makes a huge difference. But then of course I miss him, I miss my husband, I miss my kid, and but I have to do it. And yeah, and they're like glad to have me not wandering around the house for a couple days, like trying to figure out like how to end something.
Right. Yeah. Sukriti again.
Personal essay. Oh, this is just a quote. Personal essay writing, the gift of making people feel less alone and making them understood. I think that's true. What is a failure that you feel like you really learned from? Kaylee asks. Oh, that's a good question. I should have an answer to. I'll say that, I kind of had this fantasy that I was going to be like a Times Magazine contributing editor type journalist who would get all these assignments and like jet set around the world to go and everybody would just want to read me talking about, the Sahara or about Disneyland or something. And they just don't. I just never became that writer. And I was surprised. I got a couple of assignments and I thought I did a good job, and people didn't think so. I really had to deal with that. And
the editors didn't think so, or the reaction was tepid?
Yeah. Like the editors. It'd be like it wasn't what they wanted.
Huh. I would love to hear you write about Disneyland personally.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Me too. Yeah. So I think it's just basically accepting what people didn't want from me and just being and focusing on what they did want, which was essays and history, stuff like that. I feel like I can do well, and that finding the Venn diagram of stuff you're good at and stuff people want to hear from you is the key, I think.
Right. That's good. We need to draw that.
Yeah, I was right. How did you find your agent? Go ahead.
And just on that Venn diagram, I also still, I talk a lot about the importance of not letting the tail wag the dog completely. So if you have a passion and an interest, you can pursue that in your spare time when you're not making a living, and maybe you can make something out of that. Like if people had said to Michael Pollan, who I just mentioned, or Malcolm Gladwell, don't do that weird idea. Don't write a whole book about being the history of being an omnivore or whatever, or and they said, yeah, right, no one's done that and made a living, we wouldn't have had those books. Right. So.
That's right. No, and it's you have to balance this sort of hubris of I can do anything. It's, I'm going to make it happen with, you don't want to be a pushover. You don't want to just accept negative feedback as the end all be all truth. So it's finding that balance. And for me, it was about realizing that all the evidence, the preponderance of the evidence, was about me going this other way.
So you were reading Wendy's, I think.
Wendy says, how did you find your agent? So I've been through several agents. I love my current agent. And cocktail parties, is the first way. And like, gets to the social thing we were talking about of like being in the mix, like being around other writers, being around editors, being at the places where you talk to the people about these things on a regular basis. And out of every, 50 of those cocktail things or book readings you go to, one time you'll be talking to somebody who will say, oh, you're looking for an agent. I know a great agent. Mm-hmm. So that's one way. Another way is to find an agent is you find books that are like yours or like your writing, or things you like to write. You go to the acknowledgments page I mentioned earlier, and you find out where they say, I'd like to thank my wonderful agent. Right. And I guarantee if you go to the bookstore, pull out 10 books that you feel are really very similar to your style, and look at the acknowledgments, there will almost always be repeated names. There are not a million agents in the world. And you can write to those people and you can say, I cold pitched like almost every agent that I've had. I cold pitch editors all the time. That's the way things happen. You can write and say, I loved so-and-so's, I love Claire Dieter's book. I see that it represent her. I feel like my memoir is very similar to her last book. Would you mind taking a look at it? Totally legit way to get an agent.
Love that.
Yeah. And you do that 20 times and then one person writes you back. So, yeah. And that's a good ratio, but you only need one.
Love that.
Okay. How do you approach someone you know or don't know and ask them to be a source in your article? What if it's a sensitive topic like personal health? I just think being really straightforward, and also being really confident in what you're doing. Like, I think realizing what the meaning and the purposes of what you're doing so that you approach it with confidence, not like you're trying to put one over on them. Because I've had that experience where secretly I was like thinking this article was going to be a little negative or something, and it comes through. Like, it's really hard to conceal that stuff. Yeah. Like, can I talk to you about, crazy people, and how you try to say, if you're trying too hard to sort of word it in this way that's going to not alienate them, you need to kind of, I think, look at what you're trying to get from them and figure out a way that you can convey it honestly. And I think just being upfront, and I think people want to talk, like, more often than not. Yeah. And if it's a hard thing to get people on the record about, see if your editor will let you talk to them anonymously or use their first name or a pseudonym. Often with a sensitive topic like personal health, that's an option.
I also think explaining to people who are going through some health thing, if you're writing a story about that health thing, explaining the reason, like, this will help
exactly
the public have a greater understanding and more funding and more awareness, then they feel like it's for a good cause that they're giving up privacy.
And having integrity as a writer. Like, if you can say, here are 10 stories or 2 stories I've done about invisible illness, as you can see, I take it really seriously, and
right.
Something like that, I think that makes people trust you.
There's another one from Wendy there.
Okay, what author or book has helped you find your voice? I like a lot of old stuff that doesn't sound like me at all, like P.G. Wodehouse or Oscar Wilde, or like old humor, like humor writers from the early 1900s would be my wheelhouse, like, as far as stuff that I really like to listen to or hear. And it doesn't necessarily come through directly, but I think there's something about the way that they're playful with language that I read them really early, and it really sunk in somehow.
Love that.
What about you, Waylon? Do you have an author?
Well, I thought you might mention Mark Twain. I love Mark Twain.
I love Mark Twain too.
For me, Kerouac was what I went through this process where I would read writers and I would ape their voice. I would become a bad.
It's a good way to do it. I totally approve of that. I think it really it sinks in when you try to copy.
Yeah, I get really inspired by their voice. F. Scott Fitzgerald, his short stories particularly. He put as his editor, Macaulay or something, said he put his best effort into short stories because they were the most highly paid at the time, Saturday Evening Post, and he had to pay for his wife, Zelda, who was in a insane asylum. So the novels like Great Gatsby were like almost an afterthought for him. The short stories was what he was known for. His short stories really guided a lot of my writing, probably more than anyone ultimately. But I think, it was a process of like, you get really into their voice. I wrote like Kerouac, and you read that writing and it's awful now. It's like embarrassing, but you write your way out of that. You shed it and you learn from it as you go through it.
Yeah. Okay, so someone asked, do you write in the same place, same time every day? No, it's different every day. Like some days I only get like an hour in between running errands, and sometimes I go to the library and sit there for 8 hours straight, and sometimes I go to coffee shops, and
right.
It's just to kind of catch as catch can, unless I can take a day and just go somewhere. But those are rare.
I think that's like a personality thing, because I feel like the type A people out there always ask that question. And then there's
some people can't do that. I mean, I have friends who can't, they need real structure, and
yes.
Everyone's different.
Like my mom is a writing teacher, and she was on this academy recently, and she talked about having one place, because that place will haunt you. I loved how she said that, if you're ignoring it. But for me, it's the opposite. It's exactly like Ada. I'll write wherever. I like cafes personally. I'll write wherever I feel inspired. Home is fine. I don't even think about that question, quite honestly. I just write wherever.
Yeah. Okay, so Ruth has a couple of questions. One was about describing my path to becoming a columnist for the Times. So, I'm a freelancer and I pitch stuff all the time all over. And the Times has been receptive, especially to personal essays. And I think, I don't know why it's been a good fit. Like I've done 7 for them, I guess, in the last few years. It's just something about, I think maybe it's like sexy for them, the stuff that I write. Like it's not sexy for Playboy, but for the Times, I think it kind of reads as like titillating. And then, so another question was, is it hard to break into writing as an older female, or if it doesn't really matter? I think it doesn't matter. It is true that some industries prefer younger folks. I think tech, but I think writing is one place where there is a real interest in hearing from all different voices. So young and old, and men and women, and people of color. And I think especially now, there's a real cry for that, a real awareness that needs to happen. And there's actually a lot more magazines for women. There's like a lot of women's magazines and vehicles, because women read a lot. So it's an advantage to you being an older woman in a lot of ways.
Yeah. In the past Academy session with you, Ada, there was an interesting moment, and I think this was pre-Me Too, where people were asking about women in publishing and women in writing. And you said, well, this is actually one industry that is predominantly women, or
I think it's majority women. It doesn't mean there isn't Me Too stuff. I mean, there was a media men list that went around, and there were some names on, there were some names on there. So there are problems, but I think if you're a freelancer and you're trying to write for places, you should definitely not feel like it's going to limit you if you're a woman. And then Ruth also asked about the Oprah story, and says that she really related to it, and says, can I touch on the inspiration for the article? Was it a personal experience that felt like the last straw, or a combination of things? So I think it was this editor spotting something that I wasn't even aware of, which was that I was really struggling with a lot. I was taking care of, what's like a breadwinner, and raising a kid, and trying to work full time, and trying to balance all these other things at the same time. And she saw it even before I did, that was something that I was grappling with, and that was a generational thing, that our mothers and grandmothers didn't have the same experience of midlife that we're having.
Can't wait to read it.
Thank you. And then she said also, what are some tips about writing something like that without sounding so victimized? Yeah. And then she said she sort of struggles feeling like, if she's writing about how hard it is, she feels like just crying poor me and scrapping it instead. So tips or suggestions. try to find humor wherever you can. I mean, I think it's the most important, the easiest route out of the poor me stuff is like, why is it funny? Like, where is the humanity and the humor in it? There's always something. And I think it helps personally to find the humor. And I think it also really helps in writing, because if it is just a story, a tale of woe, then why is it interesting to people? You know, the best you'll get is somebody will feel sorry for you or think, oh yeah, they have it as bad as I do. But if you can put it in a greater context, or you can find humor, those things will make it much more widely accessible.
I also think I completely 1,000% agree with that. On the other hand, just being brave and vulnerable enough to write it just plain, just write it out. That's that sort of catharsis, and not worry about how it sounds, whether it sounds, you can write about the poor me-ization of where you're at.
Yeah.
But just almost treat it like a journal. If you don't feel ready to write about it in a way that's presentable, just write it for yourself. And there's a processing.
It's true. Okay. And then there was a question about my marriage. Everyone's so curious about my marriage. It's like, it's so funny. Like, you search my name and like husband is like the second, like Google autofill. And this person, Kat, is talking about, you know, like open relationships and all this kind of struggles. So if you read my book, Wedding Toast I'll Never Give, available soon in paperback, but out now in hardcover, I talk about this like at length, because I think there is this real sense that there is, if you get married, the wall is going to come down and you'll never have to deal with it unless there's some problem in your marriage, and then you're just doomed for divorce, right? Those are like the two possibilities you're presented with. Like, either you're the Pences, right? You're Mr. and Mrs. Pence, and you never talk to anybody else and everything's great, and you stay married until you die and you call each other mom and dad. Or you're like some kind of swinger something. And then you're going to get divorced because it never works, right? Like, those are the two things. And I just think if you're going to be married a long time, like, stuff comes up. And I think, just, if nothing else, acknowledging it to yourself that it's going to be something to figure out. Like, how do you deal with it? Like, where are the boundaries? And maybe it is a Pence situation where there is like iron wall, like that. If you should know that about yourself. It's the way it is. But I think it's just a spectrum for everyone. And I think it's something that takes a lot of figuring out at some point in almost every marriage that I know about. But read more in the book.
Yeah, it's such a good book.
Thank you.
Please go out and get that book. All right, final question from Wendy, our big hitter of the day. What are the things you look for when revising your writing?
Yeah, so I mean, I revise like constantly. I print stuff out. Sorry to the trees. I know you're concerned with the trees, but I do print things out, and then I mark them up on paper, and I almost always see different things than I do when I see it on the screen. Yeah. So that's one trick. You know, if I start zoning out or feeling bored, somebody else is going to too. So I go by feeling a lot. Yeah.
Just because we are an environmental publication, I have to point out that trees are the least of the problem. There's actually nothing wrong with paper if it comes from a managed forest. It creates jobs and places for animals to live.
Oh, good.
So you're pretty good. It's only clear cutting. Once in a while, clear cutting is involved in toilet paper and stuff, so you have to be careful.
Okay.
And palm oil, things that are devastating for us. But managed forest, which is every piece of paper you're probably going to buy, is actually a positive. And sadly, the ink is a much bigger problem. Oh. Yeah, sorry. Kind of a happy thing for a second.
I was excited for a minute. I was going to get the approval.
And bleach is awful. So the less chemicals you can have involved, the better. So let's all thank Ada, if you mean it. Ada, you're always such a delight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. It's a real honor. How was this experience for you?
Great. No, what a nice bunch of people you have over there. It's a fun group always.
They're good folks. Great questions, everyone. Do we have any homework from Molly or anyone in charge? CJ? They'll be in touch, CJ says. All right. Do we have any homework from, I'm sure that some of the editors are in the comments. Kenny, is anyone in charge of this? I guess if I'm in charge,
you get to decide.
Thank you, Ada, so much. Let's all take a great posture and with friendship and respect and a healthy sense of humor about ourselves, give it away. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll see you soon. Bye.
Okay. CJ, you can take us out.